search on the airplanes, in the back roads and the rails, on the blacktops and the beach, down the sewer and up the creek, in the penthouse and the pool halls and the jails, to the criminal with no one left to con, to the movie star whose day is come and gone. Hooray where you are, hooray where you are. In the fields and in the factories, there's no limit Sure.
What a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Have we trials and temptations? Is there trouble anywhere? We should never be discouraged. Take it to the Lord in prayer. And we find a friend so faithful, who will all our sorrows share. Jesus knows our every weakness. Take it to the Lord in prayer.
One more verse.
Are we weak and heavy laden, cumbered with a load of care? Precious Savior, still our refuge. Take it to the Lord in prayer. To thy friends despise, forsake thee. Take it to the Lord in prayer. In his arms he'll take and shield thee. Thou wilt find a solace there. Yes, you will.
Thank you. Thank you. Woo!
The lost bag has been found.
Oh, great.
Do you need anything while you're up here, water? Or?
No, I got imaginary coffee up here. Good afternoon. Let's try something different. The Lord be with you. That's better. Great to have you back. Everybody have a good meal? Did you have a great caucus? Those are sort of oxymoronic words, aren't they? A good caucus. All right. Well, we have some work that we need to do this afternoon. And remember when I told you we may move some things around? We're going to move a thing around. We're going to do some introductions. Hold on, give me 1 second. And that's the people up here at the front table. To my far left, Dr. Carla Borkart is your vice president. In the center of the table, Pastor Jonathan Vihar is your secretary. And to my immediate left is Pastor Bob Hanson, the Robert Hanson, who's our parliamentarian. All right. So I'm going to do some more. Carly, you're going to do some announcements here in a second. I don't want to wait until this evening to introduce our new people to South Dakota, because I would like you to take the opportunity as we're moving around this afternoon and at breaks of being able to greet them. So as I say your name, would you please stand and then remain standing, and then we'll do applause at the end for all of you. The Reverend Dr. Leonard Hummel, who I don't believe is here, but he might be. He's been teaching at Augie and is moving into retirement. Reverend Young Chung, and I know that Pastor Chung is here. And then Pastor Justin Kozek. Not here, standing. Okay. I know that the Reverend Pam Powers is not here. She ended up with a funeral. And then Pastor Justin Van Orman. Thank you. Pastor Patrick Jenkins, who tried to be introduced earlier today. And Pastor Jeremy Dupree. Excuse me. Now, if you would all greet them, that would be wonderful. All right, the announcement about the lost bag, it has now been found. And all is right with the world, or at least with lost bags. Okay. Trying to find the right spot. All right. Now let's ask our Vice President up for a couple of announcements.
Good afternoon. I don't know if Pastor Sammy is here this morning. She said you shouldn't be moving the microphone around, so I'm just going to leave it where it is. Is that what I'm supposed to do? I'm obviously not as tall as Bishop. So just a couple of announcements. A reminder, your cell phones, please either turn them in silent mode or turn them off. And if it would happen to vibrate while we're here and you do have to take a call, we would ask that you would leave the gathering space and go outside if you need to take a call. The Synod Assembly office, or the Synod office at the Assembly, is just outside the door and to the right, kind of where the little welcome center is. And so if you have any questions or if there's needs related to the Assembly, there will be someone there at the Synod office. A reminder about your voting devices. I think people probably were told this when you checked in, but we will be doing our voting by electronic voting, and you are responsible to keep track of your voting device throughout the Assembly, and that means it's your responsibility tonight when you leave, and then to bring it back with you tomorrow. And at the end of the Assembly, then you'll be expected to turn it in. And I don't know if you know, but there's a number on your voting device, and your number is tied to your name in the registration system. And your name is tied to your address and your contact information in the registration system. So if for whatever reason you happen to not turn in your voting device at the end of the Assembly, Lois will track you down. And if for whatever reason you can't find your voting device after you've taken it home, or it's stuck or lost somewhere, there is a $52 charge for lost or damaged voting devices. So it's important to keep track of where your voting device is. And then one last thing, for our youth gathering, Synod Day at the youth gathering, or the Synod Day at the National Youth Gathering, we have Synod t-shirts that are available. And so if your congregation has young people attending the ELCA Youth Gathering, please check at the table in the gathering place, and I think it's along the railing that goes down to the stairs, down to the downstairs. You can pick up your Synod Day shirts for the ELCA Youth Gathering. And the shirts are marked by congregation and by synod, so they should already be designated for you. Who has the most youth going to the ELCA youth gathering? South Dakota for the third time. So congratulations and good work. Thank you for encouraging and supporting your youth in attending that youth gathering. That's all the announcements as far as I'm aware. Is there anything else? Okay. So then I will call for the credentials report. Here comes Dawson, so welcome, Dawson.
Good afternoon. There are 123 clergy voting members present, as well as 176 lay female voting members, 109 lay male voting members, making a total of 285 lay voting members, and that brings our total voting members to 408. Thank you.
Very good. You can go sit down if you need. Thank you. So this is my 11th report to you, and I don't know if it was the best year, but it was pretty close. It's been a great year. And I wanted to start with a word of thanks. You heard it in Victoria's report, and you're going to hear it again in mine. For the work that we do together, the shared ministry that we have across the state, and just our ability to function as a community is enhanced and engendered and enlivened when you show up. And you show up in a variety of ways. And one of those is financial. So for the first time since I've been in this office, we finished the year, no, that's not true. Since the first time since 09, the fiscal year of 09, we finished the year at 103% of income. And that's a really fun meeting. You know, where should we spend this extra money? Now, I once again put in my proposal that there should be a standing bishop's elk hunting fund, and that did not work. So instead, we shared that abundance with our mission partners, with Churchwide. We cleared up a deficit from the year before, and we moved into this year in really good shape. And then it got better because we received your statements of intent. And so a year ago, you passed a budget, and it was a very conservative budget, and which I don't have much problem with. But after receiving your statements of intent, we were able to increase this operating budget by, was it 4%? I believe it was 4%, which gets passed along to our mission partners, to Churchwide, and the ministry that we do across South Dakota. So I wanted to start with, you should give yourself a round of applause. Seriously. So we are on track. And mission support is coming in like one would hope. And so again, I want you to hear a thank you from myself, from the staff, and from all the partners that those gifts go to. If nothing else, you should be able to have an answer when you go back to that council meeting, of which I've attended more than one, where the person at the council meeting goes, why do we send that money to the South Dakota Synod? And does it do any good at all? If nothing else, after these 2 days, you ought to be able to see that it actually does some good and it has some legs. And truth be told, those gifts travel all the way around the world. So again, I want you to hear a word of thanks. So one of my first fun things this year was to go to the 75th anniversary. We had a wonderful weekend up at Nisadak. It was my privilege to visit right before I attended one of the original campers, and her name is Lola Dixon. And if you think you have a tough life, think again. So those first kids when they came to the camp at Nisodak, if their dads loved them, if they were a boy, the father drove them up to the highway, and that would be Ned Dixon, got a ride of 8 miles from his dad, and they hitchhiked to camp in their suit with their suitcase. The girls, as I was told by Lola, all rode the train, and they arrived in Wabe at the train station, and they're in their dresses and their low high heels and with their suitcase, and they walked the 7 miles to camp. So there should be no fussing or whining about how we get kids. But the reason I tell that story is, you know, here's this 90-plus-year-old woman, and still talking about the impact that camp had on her. She met her husband there, they fell in love, they raised a wonderful family, and here she is now in her 90s, still being blessed by that experience, and it was just a delight to be there the weekend, to see old staff who have aged dramatically. I mean, I haven't, but boy, did they get a lot older. And just to be a part of a community gathered back together, stretched out over decades, and to celebrate worship and to just spend some lovely time together. It was just a fantastic weekend. So if you read my written report, you'll hear me talk about transitions and about endings and beginnings. I would say that in my professional life, both as a pastor and as the bishop, I would say that one of my most fruitful relationships has been with Rob Oliver. I believe he served the Augie community about as well as you can. And I was concerned when he announced his retirement. One, you don't know who's going to arrive in that position. Who are they going to pick? They did ask my opinion and some others that I know. And I could not be happier with the person that they've invited to be the college president or the university president at Augie. It's been my privilege to know her since she was about 12 years old and was running track up in northern South Dakota. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate her leadership in this role at Augie. She's hit the ground running like no other and just doing a marvelous piece of work. I truthfully overjoyed to be a part of her inauguration. I got to preach at chapel that morning. Just, again, a really fine day. So I want to lift up our Kairos program. We're in the 4th year of the Kairos program. We now have 12 people serving 20 congregations across South Dakota. You see in the picture there, Jamie Odie. Jamie, if you want to stand up. So I know I'm picking on you. You can turn around even. She's serving up at Norway, out northeast of Mobridge, and at McLaughlin, across the river. This was the day of her installation as the vicar at those 2 communities. We are deeply committed to this program. We've got, let's get the numbers up. Here's the installation of Jesse Carson up at remote Oldham. So 20 congregations served by 12 Kairos students. We have a total of 48 candidates who are in candidacy in one place or another. 5 of those are graduating. And anybody want to guess how many we got back out of the 5 that we helped support? We got 1. So 4 other people, not that they're bad people, they're not, are still serving the church. They're just not serving the church in South Dakota. So we're delighted at the young woman that's come back to serve in South Dakota, but those are the kind of figures that we deal with. On the other hand, when those 12 Kairos students are finished their education and are ready to be ordained, it would be highly unlikely that any of them would be leaving South Dakota. So there's a total of 28 Kairos students that are registered and in process. To be in the Kairos program, you have to at least be teaching Sunday school or directing choir. You have to have some role in a congregation here in South Dakota or in a neighboring state. Then we put a mentor team around you. We put a faculty member, an area pastor, and a personal mentor. Now, it's an outcome-based education, so they move at their own pace. We think it's going to take somewhere around 5 to 6 years. If they're really able to focus and make it work in their life, you could get it done in 4. It costs us $300 a month for each of those students. That's $3,600 a year. That's less than half the price for the team candidacy programs at either Luther or at Wartburg. The normal tuition now is around $16,000 for a full-time student at a seminary. The other part that's true for us is that of those 20 congregations that are being served by those 12 people, there would not be a name of a person who could come and serve them. If it was not for those Kairos students, there would be no one there to preach the gospel other than a retired pastor or bringing someone in on a part-time basis. So, I want you to hear that we are committed to this program. We've worked out some kinks and bugs, and I think it has been serving our rural congregations, and I think it will continue to do so. I got to attend my first team graduation just earlier this, well, actually now it's last month, down in Austin at Southwest Seminary. The Episcopalians put on a nice feed, I'll tell you that. There was better food at their graduation than there was at mine, I'll just say that much. It was a delight to be with Maria Cabello Solomon as she graduated from the team program. She's currently serving at Pueblo de Dios as she's finishing up now candidacy and some other pieces. We'll be planning her ordination later on for this year. I don't know that I've ever spent so much time planning a worship service, but it was well worth it. It was probably my favorite thing of the whole year. That whole week was a delight. Actually, on the same Sunday, I got to install Vicar Odie at Norway and at McLaughlin, and then took the plane out to Rapid City. Was invited by the Bear Butte Conference to come and participate in their worship service held at Calvary that evening. So that really marked the beginning of the day, or of the week. It was about an hour-and-a-half service filled with music and readings. There was an attempt at a sermon, and I can't tell you how much fun it was. It was just a delight. I'll give most of the credit to Will Olson. I don't know if Will is here. You want to stand up, Will? He was I will say, excuse me, that I have never sat in the front row of a church and changed my sermon as much as I did that evening, because just as how they talked about the Reformation and how it has played out in its complexity, it allowed me to be able to talk about some things that are pretty painful in a way I thought that was helpful. And I did. I thoroughly appreciated our time together that night. We had a little bit of everything, from Jonathan Oldhorse on the drums and the dancers from Woyatan, to music from World War II, from the Holocaust. I mean, it was an event. And it truthfully was a gift. Well, then we moved to that Wednesday night in the Sioux Falls Arena. We had slightly north of 4,000 people came to worship. These were the young people. If you saw the photo at the beginning, you saw the judicatory leaders pouring the shared water into the baptismal font. Because out of all the things that divide us, the one thing that unites us is our understanding of what Jesus does in our baptism. So here's the young people bringing the water that we'll be pouring into the font. Here's the Augie choir and the rest of the choir as they are singing the choral piece that we had commissioned for that night. It was debuted. It's just a spectacular piece. It is available for sale now. If you have a desire for your choir to sing it, it certainly is available. So we started worship that night with kids. I don't know if I can see my grandkids because they're in there. Okay, trust me, they're in there. But they were singing Jesus Loves Me, and that's how we walked in. Couldn't think of a better way to start worship than that. And there is Dr. Borkart reading scripture. And there we've got the choir doing its work. And we had Pastor Gary Westgard, who was our poet laureate for the evening. And there's Maria reading our gospel in Spanish. And finally sharing the meal. So we had asked people, gosh, I still get choked up about this. At the previous COB meeting, the bishops from Texas and Florida went to the microphone and said, please do not send us any money to our synod offices. We currently have enough resources, there's enough energy, there's enough churches in our neighboring parts of the synod. We think we have enough. We would like you to send all of your money that you're raising to Puerto Rico, to the Caribbean Synod. So we did. So that $53,000 went to the office. It goes to pay for salaries. It goes to allow congregations to stay intact because their leader can stay there because there's still money to pay them, as opposed to having them need to leave. We learned our lesson in Grand Forks flood, that if you can't keep the pastor local, the congregation dissolves because there's just enough damage because of the flooding and the disruption to life and so on and so forth. We saw the devastation that happened to the congregations up in Grand Forks. And part of it, not me, but my predecessors, made decisions about how that ought to function. And so we really have worked at bringing resources into those churches so that they can stay together as communities of faith. And your gifts that night and from across South Dakota were 1/4 of the effort that went into Puerto Rico. So that's worth a round of applause. For 50 years, I've been trying to get to Alaska. I even dated a girl. Not my wife. It was before I was married. It was all legitimate. But half the reason I dated her is her father was the CEO of the company that was building the pipeline in Alaska. And I thought, I liked the young woman, but, here's a job in Alaska. And then the state legislature in Alaska made a new rule that you had to live in Alaska for 6 months before you could get a job on the pipeline. Thank you very much. So that was my first disappointment of getting to Alaska. But this last fall, and actually the next day after our Reformation service, I got on an airplane and flew to Alaska. Pastor Shelley has gotten to be a good friend of mine. She invited me to come up and be the resource, to be the teaching theologian for their fall theological gathering. And so, of course, they always ask you, what do you want to get paid? Well, my pay was simple. I said, you gather up as many Lutheran bush pilots, we'll call it even. So I got to spend 2 days with a whole bunch of Alaskan bush pilots, and I have never had so much fun. We didn't get to go flying because it was always foggy, and none of them are IFR certified. And I kept saying, well, I am. And they kept saying, we don't have any planes that are IFR certified. Our planes are built to fly really close to the ground. So here's one of the guys. He's a professor at Alaskan University. He teaches airplane mechanics, right? And he literally built that plane from parts. There's like 6 different planes inside of that plane. And here's the guy that I want to become in my next life. He found the right woman, and all they do is hunt and fish pretty much year-round. And he's learned how to make a living doing that. But this was my favorite sign. This is not one you see very often. I thought briefly about stealing it, just so you know. But then you could see that it was actually being used for exactly what they were talking about. Because as we were sitting there, me taking the picture, here comes a dog sled with, okay, we'll leave the sign. So in Alaska, they have 26 pastors, serving the size, what's a little bit twice as large as Texas. Let's see if I can find him right away. The young man that's serving up in Shishmaref. To get to the meeting, he had to ride a snowmobile, a little tiny plane, a little bit bigger tiny plane, and then had to get on a jet and get to Fairbanks. It was just so much fun to be with him. We got 2 days together. It was just a joy to spend time up there with those folks serving the church in a very similar but also very different place. So one of the pieces that's been true in my life is I've been working on farm bills since 1983. I was serving 2 rural churches, and they thought if you're going to be our pastor, you should know something about the farm bill. I made my first trip at their invitation to D.C. and started learning about what it meant to put together farm bills. And so it has continued to be a passion of mine as I've moved through the years, and we're starting work on the current farm bill. And one of the things that we had discovered over the past couple of years is our advocacy team are all from urban areas. So they certainly get the food part, which is a huge part. It's actually the majority of the farm bill is food. But they weren't understanding farming very well. So I would love to claim credit for this, but it was Bishop Nairn's idea. Bishop Nairn, Terry Brandt, Eastern North Dakota, and myself invited them to come. We each took one at the beginning. So my person is down in the left bottom corner, John Johnson, who's a part of the advocacy team out of D.C. We had him here. We visited both Feeding South Dakota headquarters. Then we used the plane, I think the best ever, because he could visually see the change as you start to move from the 29 corridor and as you begin a pretty short trip as you go west and see the fall off in the number of farms. First by section, and then it's kind of by area, and the further west you go, there's just less and less people. So it's always amazing when I have someone on board who about every 10 minutes would go, wow, wow. And then the next day as we're flying north of Pierre up to Bismarck, and to be able to see the change from the east side of the river and the west side of the river as we're flying by the Cheyenne Reservation, and then also looking at almost no one living on the east side, but really almost no one on the west side. And what it means for us to try to do ministry when the land looks like that. So our first day was spent with farmers. We were able to be out at Tom Twight's place. Tom and Mary hosted us in the afternoon. The next morning we were out at the Beestrom Ranch, and I got to see Brittany, who, although she's not Lutheran, was someone that I still grew up, she grew up with our kids, so it was fun to see her. And she works with her dad, and they ranch together and raising Gilvay seed stock. So, but then we went up to North Dakota, gathered together, and we had, I think, the best tour of my life of a facility, and that was out of Beulah, North Dakota, where we toured a mine, we toured the coal power plant, and then the coal gasification plant. And to see people that loved their work and loved how they were impacting the earth and doing everything, I think, in their power to mitigate the impact of coal-fired energy. I learned more in the day than it was just an amazing, amazing event. I appreciated our advocacy team coming out and to see the growth in their thinking about how the Farm Bill can impact farmers and communities in really rural states like ours. And they even made me a hard hat. which I got to keep. And the only regret is the gentleman that was driving those gigantic, diggers, you know, the kind that you can put a whole truck inside the, he asked me if I wanted to drive it, and I didn't. I regret that. So, I do walk in the shadow of giants. Historically, we've had a Lutheran Day out at the legislature. It dates back at least into the 50s, back into Fuzzy's time as the district president. I know that EO did that, certainly Norm did, and Andrea did in their time in office, and we've continued that. We've always had a Lutheran Day at the legislature. Over the past couple of years, we've had some, I think, concerning pieces, people proposing legislation that I think, one, is unconstitutional, it is certainly unchurchly, and it has no place in our state. So after conversation with Betty Oldenkamp, president of Lutheran Social Service, we made the decision this year to have an interfaith day. It was not a day to promote other religions. That was not the purpose. It was a day to promote the First Amendment. I'm a huge believer in the First Amendment. I think it's one of the better pieces that we've crafted and added to our Constitution. And it is protection for us as religious people to be able to practice our religion in safety. And when you have legislators that are crafting legislation that would start mandating lists of people, and that would also like to list religions as being hateful and not being worthy of the First Amendment, it's time for, I think, me to go to work and also you to go to work. That is not the state that we live in. So we invited as many religious leaders as we could find. And I will, since I teased him this morning, Sawyer did almost all the work, just so you know. He was actually able to find someone in the Baha'i faith. He found 4 Buddhists. Who knew, right? The gentleman in the robe is their religious leader. He speaks absolutely no English whatsoever. Had a great conversation with him. It was just a delight. So we had people from the Muslim faith. We had a really good friend of mine, Stan Adelstein. If you remember 11 years ago, Stan was a part of my installation service. So here's Muhammad and Stan shaking hands. You see Bishop Tarrant in the middle. And here's the crew that was gathered. It was a fun day. But it was a day that I wished you had been there. It would have mattered, I think, to our legislators if you had been present. So I do not know that we're going to do it again, depending on how things break out this fall, and as we see legislation being dropped and being talked about, we may need one again, and it will be for the same exact purpose, to remind our legislators that we are a people of law, and we have a very good one in the First Amendment to the Constitution. If nothing else, we will be there to remind them of that. So Pastor Charlie Bunk was just in Cameroon. One of the programs that we have continued to support, it has been around, I believe, at least through Bishop Andrea's administration, maybe started with Bishop Norm. But we have continued that. It principally revolves around providing scholarships, particularly for girls, so that they can attend our parochial schools in Cameroon. The one piece that is not in the report, and I wanted the whole assembly to hear this, is one of the things he was able to report back to me this morning is that reconciliation now is almost complete. Starting with our decision in Minneapolis, that was the lit match that got thrown into the bonfire in Cameroon. And it caused great consternation and a split in the church, which was pretty well going by the time I got there early in 2010. And I know that Bishop Niwe and now Bishop Ngozo has worked mightily to get that put to bed and to bring those two communities of faith back together. And Charlie was able to report that the last pastor is making application to come back onto the roster of our partner ministry over there. Just some really fine work. And I appreciate the work that Bishop Ngozo has done in that area. And this is a picture of our young people that are down in Nicaragua, and the work that we do there continues. Tomorrow morning you're going to hear a couple of people talking about ministries that are ongoing, that we have come alongside of, and so I invite you to, this is just a shameful invitation to come to the prayer breakfast tomorrow morning. And I'm not going to steal their thunder, but I'll let you listen to them as they talk about the ministry that they're heading up down in Nicaragua. You heard us report on this a year ago on kin ministry and befrienders ministry. We've finished now a full year. It has gone well. I've talked to several of the pastors that have this in their congregation. There's some electronic platform stuff that you utilize, but the big piece is the befriender ministry that's a part of this. Whoop. So you can have a real-time understanding of how your outreach ministry is going. It's a safe, simple, secure platform. You get the great education with befrienders, and that you don't lose people in your congregation. It's a way of keeping track of our shut-ins that we have in our congregation. This is a quote from Tom Opoyan. Can you read it? I'm going to let you read it. So Trinity and T is one of the places that's using that. In fact, why don't we'll do it the easy way. The pastors that have this in their congregations, would you please rise so people can see you and if they have questions. There's Tom. Is Catherine here? Perfect. And thanks for being a part. So if you've got questions about it, well, you can see the names of the people that are involved in leadership roles. Well, the only thing I didn't like about Victoria is there wasn't enough bragging about South Dakota, in her report. We're going to Houston here in just a couple of weeks. That's where your kids are going to be gathering for worship at night. And that's how many kids we have registered right now going. And those of you who do know me, you know that I am competitive, and particularly with people that are really good friends of mine. And so Steve Delzer, who's the bishop in Southeastern, they've always come in second, now for the fourth time in a row. Not that I'm happy about that, but yes, I am. So he actually called me in February when I was recovering from knee surgery, and he goes, "So, how's your registration going?" Pretty good. So then it's, who's going to give the number first, right? Oh yeah, crushed him. So a couple of pieces that we utilize in the Synod to raise money for specific things. One of them is a golf tournament that I host. I don't play golf, but anyway, they let me show up. We have a major gift that pays for food and the golf. So every dime that you give to the event actually goes to the bottom line. That part's already covered with the major gift that we have. All of the proceeds go to seminary debt reduction and just adds to the amount of money that we can utilize to help pay pastors who are serving in South Dakota to pay down their debt. Now, the best part of this is that I've got a really good friend of mine who's a little tiny old lady. I don't have permission to give you her name, but she is a joy, and she yelled at me this last year. And she yelled at me because I didn't ask her for enough money. She had a very good year financially. She always matches whatever we net, and she was not happy with the total. So the more teams that we have, and the more people that show up to play golf, and Lord knows when I look at your church attendance on Sunday morning, I know where most of you are at. So it's easy enough to show up at this tournament, kick in your dough, and it goes to the bottom line and it gets matched. So that's on July 9th. We'll feed you, golf you, and celebrate the end. So we added another event, one that I can actually participate in, which is the Bishop's Blast. As a part of our campaign of Listen, God is Calling, there was money there set aside for being able to hire a recruiter for full-time leadership in the church. And we were able to do that. But it's a set number. And so I wanted to enhance that and to be able to have that ministry carry on after I'm done. And so we started this event last year. Again, I've got a major donor that pays for the food and the targets. It's a great afternoon. We had a delightful time. It will be on a Sunday this year. We're going to try that. For our area teams, there would be enough time for you to get there by 12:30. It's $600 a team. If you want to be a sponsor, it's $1,000. And again, all of that money will get matched by that same little old lady. And then we will use that to be able to pay Jake's salary as we move on into the future. Well, I'm coming up on about 100. We're almost done, by the way, so if you want to just relax for a second. I've almost right at about 100, getting close, ordinations. And for me, it's like, I love doing baptisms. I mean, truthfully, it's like the best thing ever. But ordinations are kind of like that, because you're taking a person from one part of their life into a different part of their life, and it's just this wonderful process. I just thoroughly enjoy it. But I've never had one like this. First of all, I got to fly out to Big Timber, Montana, and it was my best flight over the Black Hills. I got to fly over southeastern Montana. It could make you want to move there. I mean, it's that pretty. And I got to do the ordination along with Bishop Jessica Christ from Montana. I got to ordain Jeremy. Where's Jeremy at? Since we're talking about you. He's serving out in Hill City. But Big Timber's a little tiny town. It's got maybe 1,200 people in it. And I figured out pretty quick that Jeremy knew everybody. That was pretty true. And everybody knew him, and everybody knew about me, even when I wasn't dressed up like this. So there had been conversation. So we got to the ordination, and the church, I am not joking, was packed. There are people standing along the edges and in the back. It's that full. So this is Jeremy's dad. That's the man in the middle. His name's David, and that's his grandpa. Now you got to pay attention. His name's Richard. Watch what Richard's wearing. It's a rare day when you get to make real cowboys cry, but we got it done that day. Because when we got to the stole, Grandpa took his off. Best day ever. So it was a delight to be there. This assembly is about invitations to service in the church. You heard it in the sermon this morning. You're going to hear about it tonight at the banquet. You're going to hear lots of call stories. But you see how it works, right? So here's a grandpa that's been whispering in a grandson's ear. Here's a dad that's a pretty solid example. Here are people that have surrounded that young man his whole life. And that's how it works. It worked that way for me. I know a number of the pastors that are in here that they would tell the same story. But what I want you to hear is that it's also true for you. Because every one of you were invited by Jesus to follow him in your baptism. It wasn't when you get ordained. It was when you were baptized. And we followed Jesus from then on. And each of you go and do it in your own ways. And we've got teachers and engineers and policemen. We've got other kinds of law enforcement, military. We got all kinds of people in here who are following Jesus Christ. But I want you to know that we're all surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. And it was a delight to see that in action in a very real way as the stole got handed off from one generation to another. So thanks for the privilege of serving as your bishop. It's been a great year. All right. We are now, let's see, give me 1 second. Oh, over the course of these 2 days, you're going to hear from different people. No, over the course of this day, you're going to hear from 3 people. We're going to have a breakout at the end of the day before we go to dinner. And this is the first topic. Let's see here. I've got to catch up with myself. So when we get to that open space, you're going to have to pick. There will be 3 choices. And we'll announce this as we get to that 4:30 breakout time. But we're going to have one on the 50th anniversary of the ordination of women. No, that's not true. We're going to have one on justice for women, the social statement. We will have one on immigration. And what's the third one? Oh boy. What's that? Oh, culture of call. Thank you. What I just talked about. All right. So, if we could have Pastor Heidi Binstock and Pastor Lori Hope, or is it just you? Just you. Okay. And she will be doing our introduction to the statement on the social statement of women in justice.
Good afternoon. I'm Heidi Binstock. I serve as a pastor at Westside Lutheran here in Sioux Falls. And one of the topics for one of our breakout sessions today is the draft social statement on women and social justice. It is a new statement that has come out just in the last year, but there is a backstory to it. At the 2009 Churchwide Assembly, after receiving memorials from some synods, the Assembly authorized the development of a social statement on women and justice. In 2012, the ELCA Task Force on Women and Justice, One in Christ, was established to begin their work on developing this social statement. And then in November of 2017, the draft social statement on women and justice was sent out to the greater church for a time period of reflection and feedback, which lasts now until the end of September of this year, at which time they will take that feedback, make revisions, and then the social statement will be presented for adoption at the 2019 Churchwide Assembly. You might be thinking, what are social statements? I'll tell you, this comes from the ELCA's definition. Social statements are theological and teaching documents that are intended to help the ELCA and its members make judgments on social issues from a perspective of faith. They govern our church's institutional policy and guide our public advocacy and witness. And even though this social statement has been in a work in progress for almost 10 years, this may be the first time that you are hearing about it. Nonetheless, though it's taken 10 years to come together, it feels like it is a timely topic. In the Me Too era, we find ourselves in regular conversation about gender discrimination, harassment, and bias, which sadly we thought was a conversation for long ago, but turns out to be a conversation for today. I think you can just ask any woman in this room if they have a story to tell, and we find out that it is indeed a relevant topic. Nonetheless, it's not just a topic for women, because when we know that when we are all a part of the body of Christ, when one member suffers, we all suffer with that member. When one is harmed, we are all harmed. So, If this is a topic that is being talked about in our culture, in our society, and also among us, then how can we talk about it in the context of faith? And what can we do about it in the context of faith? The draft social statement on women and justice seeks to provide some guidance to this conversation. Some of the key themes that emerge from the document are: 1, core convictions that all humanity is created equally in the image of God, and that fullness of life is intended for all. That all of us, as created in the image of God, however, are also all sinners. And as sin enters into our lives, we are all in need of redemption, which we have in Christ. Nonetheless, even though we are redeemed, that does not mean we continue in sin. By no means, Paul says. But we rather find new life in Christ, and that means new ways of living. The document also asserts that the sins to be named in this conversation are patriarchy and sexism, and that these have contributed to the injustices suffered by women. This is seen in gender stereotypes, use of language, structures of policy, and pay, to name a few. The document also says that commitment to justice is essential for human flourishing, and this commitment to justice includes confessing our sins of commission and omission around women and justice. The Holy Scriptures and the Lutheran confessions are the ways in which we are rooted in this conversation and guide the conversation and our understanding of justice and the way that we are called into new ways of living. Fourth, from this document, we will find ideas for responding to God's call for justice, and there are many in the document. Ideas about our global life, our communal life, our relational life, from ending gender-based violence to changing policies to supporting shared roles in the home. There are many opportunities for action and making a difference that this document will give to us. If you would like to know more about the statement and the key themes that emerge from the document, if you would like to know how your conversation can engage in conversation around the document and maybe even provide feedback to the task force, or if you are simply interested in a conversation on women and justice, then you're invited to join Pastors Ann Rosendale, Lori Hope, and myself during the breakout session in that time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Appreciate that. Now, if we could get our team back up here to the front, we're going to start to do some resolutions. And if we could get Pastor Craig Wexler from the Resolutions Committee to please come forward. We will be taking up, first of all, Resolution 3A. 3A, if you would like to turn to that. Oh, we got to do some practice. They just looked so ready. So we're going to practice voting, and we're actually going to ask some important questions as a part of this. Not all of them are important. So the first one, this one is important, because it kind of gives you a visual representation of where people are from. You have to be able to find your letter on the device all the way down to G, and please vote now the conference that you're from. Now, as you vote, if you look at the screen, so in my case, I'm a member here at Our Savior's, which means Crossroads. So I pushed C or 3, and that appeared. And then it will go away. Okay? And when I say, please close the vote. All right. Got a lot of people from Crossroads. Which breakout session will you attend? A, for women and justice. B, immigration. C, culture of call. Please vote now. Again, you should be able to look in that little screen and see your vote. And if you're not seeing that, one, try doing it with your hand a little higher. This is line of sight. So if you're voting down between your feet, It may not register. Okay, please close. Oh, very good. Next practice. Is your congregation attending the youth gathering? Well, that should be 100%, right? All right, please vote now. Anybody having any difficulties? Not seeing your vote show up? Okay. Close the vote. Oh yeah, and that's why we have the most kids, because you're doing the work. I mean, I do take the credit, just so you know, but you actually are the ones that are doing all the heavy lifting. All right, next one. We are ready for Resolution 3A.
3A, resolution supporting the 50th anniversary of the ordination of women, sourced from Hope Lutheran Sioux Falls. Resolved that the South Dakota Synod create a committee to plan for the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the ordination of women. This committee would be charged to create ways to assist the Synod and member congregations in the recognition of the anniversary in 2020, and be it further resolved that the South Dakota Synod create a designated account for congregations to give toward for the funding of a celebration and recognition of the 50th anniversary of women in ministry, and be it further resolved that congregations and individuals be encouraged to give special gifts earmarked for the recruitment of women in ministry to the South Dakota Synod, Listen God is Calling Fund for leadership recruitment, and that any funds remaining from the celebration and recognition be added to these special gifts, and be it further resolved that congregations be encouraged to celebrate the gifts of female clergy through prayer and blessings using worship resources from the ELCA designed for the recognition, and be it further resolved to direct the South Dakota Synod Council to make women in ministry and equity issues the theme of the 2020 South Dakota Synod Assembly in order to give thanks to God for the work of female clergy in South Dakota, express the Synod's commitment to provide ongoing support for gender equality in South Dakota, and encourage the congregations and the members of the congregations of the South Dakota Synod to provide regular and ongoing support for female clergy in South Dakota. The recommendation is do pass.
So it is on the floor. Is there speaking? Microphone 2.
Yes.
Bishop Lene Sorensen, pastor at Hope Lutheran and author of this resolution. I give thanks to the resolution committee for helping to add some insight as to some of the financial aspects that we put together for some of the whereases. It was on September 19th, 2004 that I was ordained into the Word and Sacrament ministry. In the whole story of the narrative of women, there is no way that we can ignore the story that goes on in the world today. Everything from the Lean In movement to the Me Too movement. And I would say, it has only been 50 years. But it has been 50 years. Let us celebrate, for we must celebrate our accomplishments, and we must celebrate all that the Evangelical Lutheran Church can offer when it comes to women in ministry. Martin Luther said, "We are not yet what we shall be, but we are growing toward it. The process is not yet finished, but it is going on. This is not the end, but it is the road. It is the road." Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone 3.
Pastor Siri Beckman Sorensen, serving with the people of Grace Lutheran in East Central Sioux Falls, where we proclaim grace. It's amazing. I came to the South Dakota Synod 30 years ago. In 1988, I was ordained in July, came to serve Calvary in Rapid City. At that time, I was the 24th woman to serve on the roster of South Dakota. So in 20 years, there were 24 women. Currently, and this is a first also for South Dakota, we have or achieved roster parity. There are about 51% of the roster is women, 49% men, and that always is changing. But that is a phenomenal thing and a move over the last 30 years. And this synod has always been open really to the vision of God, the work of God that was spoken of by the prophet Joel, and started to be fulfilled on the day of Pentecost. In those days, God declared, I will pour out my spirit on all people, male, female, young, old, rich, poor. Everybody is called to ministry. And this synod and the preceding districts have always been a part of making this vision of God a reality. And I am grateful, as I have served in this synod for 30 years, for the women who were a part of mission societies and women's organizations who became presidents and leaders in their congregations, really showing that God pours out his spirit on all, male and female. I am grateful for Barbara Andrews, the first woman ordained in the ALC, and privileged to have met her. She also was a pastor who served from a wheelchair. She kind of broke a couple of barriers. I am grateful for the bishops of this synod. Norm Eitram, who recommended women for call to parishes, not just to get women here, but because they had the gifts for ministry. And for a synod that elected the second woman bishop in the ELCA and the fifth in the world. We have a lot to celebrate with continuing leadership, and so this resolution celebrates us all. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone 3.
I'm Pastor Sammy Johnson from Our Savior's Lutheran Church in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. This month I will be celebrating my 3rd year of ordination, of ordained ministry in South Dakota Synod, and I am grateful for the women who came before me to make that no big deal at all. This church insisted that they call a woman pastor, and Heidi came before me, and they were eager to have another woman serving in their congregation. I am grateful for so many who have made that path for me and others in the future.
Thank you. Microphone 2.
Thank you, Bishop. My name is Tom Twite. I'm a lay delegate from Resurrection Lutheran Church in Pierre. We were an LCA congregation prior to the ELCA being formed, and I was on the church council prior to that time. And in 1983, we called the first female pastor to our church. Since the formation of the ELCA, we've called 5 pastors, 3 women, 2 men. I fully support the movement to have women pastors in our church. I'm excited to hear that we've reached parity. I have, however, a concern. My first assembly was in the early 90s, and at the time we were required, and I don't know that it was a law, but it was made very clear to us that we should have equal representation of men and women at that assembly, and I think that's still the case. However, I've been to the last 3 assemblies, and amongst the lay leadership, we have the same kind of ratio we've had today, 170 women to 110 men. And I'm concerned, being a man who's raised a son, that we hold up the women because we need to understand how to be graceful to women and to follow their leadership. But we also need to hold up the men and make sure that us men who can be lazy don't slip away and let the women do it all. So I do agree and I do support this resolution, but I would like this assembly to consider that we make sure that we keep both men and women in the forefront in recruiting pastors and in telling the message that we need that kind of leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional speaking? Seeing no movement, are you ready to vote on Resolution 3A? All those in favor of Resolution 3A, please push 1. If you are not in support of 3A, push 2. Please vote now. Please close the vote and display the results. It is passed. Congratulations. Yeah, you can applaud. That's fine. Yeah, I believe it was, talking about Pastor Siri's comment, I believe it was sometime in the end of 2016 when we hit parity that we finally got to the 50%. And I believe now we're just about at 51%. It's just right in there, female and 49% male serving in South Dakota. All right. At this time, I would invite Eric Gilbertson, our treasurer, to please come forward. Oh, not for right now. We still got some more. And he will be giving our treasurer's report. Decided not to tease you this year at all.
That's a first.
Yeah, it is.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you. As we wait for the slides to load up, I was told earlier this morning, I believe endearingly, sometimes your report can be a little boring. So I'm going to call just a little bit of an audible here. For those of you that have smartphones, pull out those smartphones. If you're adept at taking pictures, you're going to be taking some pictures. If you're adept at Twitter, you might be using Twitter a little bit. All in the spirit of making this much more interactive and less boring. So, have the clicker. Thank you. Ooh, that goes by fast. So, the intent of this, if you've been to an assembly before, you get information here and it's numbers and probably the instant the report's done, it's out of the brain. And if anyone back at your congregation asks or wants some sort of update, there's probably, I think things are good. So we're going to give you a couple photo ops of things that you can take back and use as reference points. And then I'm also going to selfishly think that you're taking pictures of me, as this is the closest I'll ever get to probably rock star status and what they get to feel like on taking pictures. So here's your first photo op. Whether you are in church governance, on council, an officer, or you know someone that is, you're going to see this from me probably every year. This is a fantastic resource for everything finance, church finance. I won't get into all the stuff that's there, but it's fantastic. And if all of a sudden you get into the reading and you don't think it's so fantastic or you have a question, I'm happy to take a phone call or an email. My personal contact info is in your materials. If you call the cell phone, I probably won't pick up the first time because I'll think you're a robocall, but leave a message and I will get back to you. So tomorrow you're going to be voting on the mission plan. And looking at the numbers, what you have a mission plan in your materials. It's a couple pages of numbers in order to help give context to what you're voting on rather than it just being a blind guess at numbers. That's why we're going to look at brief snippets of past, present, and future is what we're going to be voting on and looking at tomorrow. Very touchy. So, think the year that we just went through, 2017, that we closed out. First, Bishop had alluded and stole a little bit of my thunder in his report already, but another thing I'd like to add to his commentary, every year we have an outside CPA firm come in and audit our books and records, and again, I'd like to send a message out. Again, we got a clean, unqualified opinion for the 2017 books, and I'd also like to give a shout out to Lois Borkhardt, the business manager, because she is a major driving force in how we get there. She does a fantastic job at keeping books, records, and making sure everyone follows our financial processes accordingly. So for those of you on Twitter, there's your first hashtag, Magnificent Manager. Get a picture of her, make her internet famous. So, and here's the groundwork for the important context going forward. For the year that was audited and that we just went through, think of every dollar that the Synod spent. Now, 70 cents of every dollar ends up going out to types of ministry automatically. 70 cents on the dollar. That puts about a quarter of every dollar going to pay for salaries, bishop, and all the staff that you got to be introduced to earlier. Less than a nickel of it goes to pay some of those overhead-related items for running the office. And then less than a penny of it goes towards the meetings for the council, committees. In my opinion, that's pretty good bang for the buck. Bishop alluded to this earlier in his report. 2017, I'm concluding my 8th year serving as treasurer. This is a first, where we actually got to the end of the year, and rather than having to make hard decisions and cut, we were looking at a surplus. God is good, because amazingly that surplus was nearly about the same size as the deficit that we had the year before. So we were able to recover what we had to spend the previous year. Because it was a good year, there are 3 different buckets that the Synod really keeps its money in, and they're based on what we can do with it. And the takeaway from this slide is in 2017, we experienced increases in all of them, primarily from the surplus, and then the other 2 categories of temporarily restricted, permanently restricted. That just means the donor has imposed, your congregation has imposed some type of restriction on that money. And this largely consists of our endowments, and then the money that came in from the capital campaign that's been ongoing for the last several years and recently wrapped up. So market performance, capital campaign contributions, and then having a budget surplus, we get to see positive increases in all those different buckets of money. So that helps keep frowns off the finance guy's face. When we're talking about the cents on the dollar, that relates to the mission plan. And think of that as your income statement. These other notable items are things that wouldn't have been within the mission plan itself. They're for counting wonks, there'd be more balance sheet focused. But 2 major things. The bishop, he writes about it in his written report, and I'll give you the kudos and the shout out for it now. One of the programs that really got off the ground in 2017 was a seminary debt restructuring program. Previously, the Synod did and still has a program where in exchange for serving the Synod, pastors can have principal debt paid off from their seminary loans. As of this most recent year, it's now gone one step further. And this is a spot where you can go and take your phones out and take a picture too, because I think this would be worthwhile information back at your congregations. The Synod is now essentially, through one of the bishops, he was the relationship guy in getting this off the ground. Pastors now have the ability to refinance through the Synod some of their seminary debt, if they're eligible, at a 0% interest rate. Which is fantastic. Through conversation, this got sparked through conversation at the council level, that the realization was that pastors coming out of seminary in the relatively recent past, they have interest rates that are mid to high single digits, much higher than what would be a prevailing market rate. So if you get my quarterly letter, awesome, thank you for reading them. I'm always suspect that anyone ever reads them, but this is noted in my most recent quarterly letter, but also please pass it along back home. And then the other piece about the campaign, a lot of this happened over the last year, but as of year end, there'd been $1.5 million of campaign proceeds that the council has allocated out to those areas of the campaign. So the message back is, thank you for sending your money. It's not just sitting in the bank account. It's now getting put out to use. And I forgot to give you this heads up at the beginning. As I go through these, if I like to take questions as they go. I'm always happy to take them afterward and discuss them prior to any vote, but if there's any questions on 17, I think now would be a good stopping point to take them. Sounds good. If you're really excited about reading the audit report, that is also available in your materials. So 2018, that's the year that we're living in right now. The way it works is last year's assembly passed a budget. Bishop noted that we end up getting statements of intent. We end up revising that budget based on statements of intent. So another very exciting thing, he noted it, I don't need to get too repetitious with it, those came in higher than expected again. So just to thank you. Send another message back of thank you. That's great. What it allows us to do, the way our budget works, is when we get in more support from the congregations, we in turn are able to send out more to all those ministries that are supported. And it's tied to a percentage. So if it doesn't take an act of assembly for us to increase more money going out, it just takes you sending more money, and then we automatically send more out because it's pegged on a percentage basis. So what this, the added context, the important takeaway here, the percentages are small, they're tough to see, but in between what was adopted and revised for the year we're living in, those cents on the dollar that we're planning to spend, they're basically identical. So in our revised budget, we're still looking to spend almost 70 cents on the dollar for mission and ministry, 26 cents on the dollar for staff wages and benefits, 4 cents on the dollar for office overhead, and then a penny on the dollar for council and committee meetings, all still with the intent of keeping a balanced budget. So, any questions on the year that we're currently living in? All right. Boy, I need some practice with this thing. Oofta. All right. Here's your next photo op. And if you can come up with a more creative Twitter handle, I promise that I will retweet it. I'm going to go ahead and call this 2 in 2019. So what is being proposed right now is being driven, hoping that this trend that you heard from Victoria and you heard from the bishop, that this is going to continue and roll forward into the next mission plan. We've built in and we're hoping for a 2% increase in support that we'll receive in. So in kind, that will flow out to all the ministries, and then we'll be able to give staff raises at approximately 2% is what's built into the budget as well. And continuing with the context theme again, by proposing that 2% and going back again to the cents on the dollar, it's still keeping lockstep with where we were, where we're trying to live in now, and where we're proposing to go going forward. So that's 69 cents on the dollar going to ministry, 26 cents on the dollar going to staff wages and benefits, 4 cents on the dollar going to office overhead, and then a penny on the dollar for council and committee. All with the intent of keeping a balanced budget once again. And now, again, this will be voted on tomorrow. And a copy of this is in your app. But if there were any questions offhand, this would be a good time, an appropriate time to ask them. All right. If you have any, I will certainly be around. Please catch me. I will happily bring them back to the assembly and answer them prior to any vote on the mission plan. But barring any other questions or commentary, I look forward to seeing what you've done on Twitter, all the pictures that you're taking back to your congregations. And then if there isn't anything else, I think I will yield back the mic. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Hey, you bet.
All right. Now we're going to hear from our, well, wait a minute. Why don't you just stand up for a second? You want to do the hokey pokey? No. All right. While you're still standing, I'm going to invite our next speaker for breakout session number 2. She is an author. She's a researcher. Now you may be seated. And I got your doctoral dissertation, right? That was your doctoral. I am the proud owner of her doctoral dissertation. But I'm going to turn this over to you. She's going to be... She will be leading the breakout on immigration. It is my privilege to introduce to you Carrie Skogberg Eastman.
Thank you so much. I appreciate so very, very much this opportunity to be with you here today. And as the family of God, that we can come together to look at an issue that has been so incredibly divisive in our country and our culture, and such a topic of emotional response, that we can come together to look at this and ask for discernment and wisdom in studying something that affects so many of God's children. So I would like to tell you a little bit about what you will hear if you come to the breakout session today. There's so much information to present. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but I'd like to lead you through a little bit of what you may hear about if you are interested in coming and learning more. The past 13 years of my life have been dedicated, as I would have never predicted 20 years ago, but have been dedicated to the study of this immigration issue. And in the course of those 13 years, I've researched and read and studied and lectured on immigration. I've published 2 books on the topic, and last year's, in January, my second book came out. The purpose of this book was to look at the topic through a little bit different lens, because in this information overload society that we live in, where you can just ask Siri any question you want and in a half of a second you have an answer, there's a lot of information out there that simply is not factual. And so the purpose of this book, titled Immigration Examining the Facts, is to look at some of the most common myths or conceptions about immigrants and immigration, and study that from a purely empirical perspective, using statistics and facts and the hard evidence. What really is the state of immigration? What are the answers to those questions, and how do we respond? So, that is touchy. Okay, so I'll just begin by saying facts are really critical, and we as a society, and especially as members of the family of God, we have to work really hard to dig deeply and find the information that is truthful, to look at the sources of the information that we hear, not only about immigration, but about any other controversial topic, and really study to make sure that what we are repeating and what we are voicing is based in solid evidence and not just opinion or emotion. And I really, when I give my lectures and presentations, I really try to hit this point home more than any other. We have seen such a lack of civil dialogue in our society in recent years, and unfortunately that's often the case with our politicians or with media personalities who speak over the top of one another, who shout over the top of one another, who don't allow other voices to be heard. That's something that we have to change, and it starts here with us. And so as we discuss and discern what to do about these issues related to immigration, we have to remember, especially as Christians, because we have a special place and a special voice that represents something different than the average person on the street, we have to remember that we need to listen. Sometimes our job is just to stop and listen and hear people's voices. And when we do that, we might find out that their opinions or their strong emotional responses come from somewhere, from a story, from an experience, from something that through civil conversation and through relationship building, perhaps we can change. Perhaps we can enter into that civil conversation and make a difference. But as soon as we begin to speak over the top of one another or start with fighting words, none of that takes place. So that's really the most important thing that we can do as a civil society, is to engage in that civil conversation. Unauthorized immigrants, I'm just going to jump into a couple of the misconceptions or the myths that we may hear about or encounter in day-to-day living. We've heard, especially recently, that we are in the midst of a crisis of illegal immigration. Is this true or not? I would argue yes and no, but the crisis is not a crisis of numbers. In fact, the statistics prove that our current apprehension numbers, not only on the southern border, but also including arrests within the United States, both together, those apprehension numbers are right now at the lowest point that they've been since the early 1970s. So in recent years, we have seen not only a drop, but a huge drop in the number of people trying to enter the country without legal documentation. Just as an example, I won't go through all the numbers, but at the peak of unauthorized immigration in the year 2000, there were 1,814,729 apprehensions. Last year, 2017, there were 421,099. 310,000 of those were along the southern border. So it's a very big drop. And we're seeing a difference in the type of immigration and the nature, where people are coming from as well. In fact, last year in its annual report, the Customs and Border Protection Agency, which includes the United States Border Patrol, wrote in that report that 2017 reflected the lowest level of illegal cross-border migration on record. So that comes from the agency itself. Now, what is the crisis? I would argue, or many scholars would argue as well, that there is a crisis on the border of a humanitarian nature, because since the year 2000, over 6,000 lives have been lost by migrants trying to cross the border. And those aren't numbers or statistics that we necessarily get in our newspaper headlines or hear day to day on the news. Additionally, the apprehensions of Mexicans specifically, which until recent years, our largest group of migrants coming into the United States without documentation was from Mexico. But now the apprehensions of Mexicans is at the lowest level that it's been in 50 years. And while all this, but rather we've seen a change in the nature of people or the type of people who are coming and where they're coming from. Rather than Mexico, we are now seeing a great increase in the number of people from the northern triangle of Central America, the countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And that is almost entirely due to incredible violence caused by the gangs that have taken over communities there. And the second reason is for family reunification, for families that have been split and wanting to reunite. But the gang violence has driven thousands of people, not just to the United States. That's a misnomer. We tend to think that we are the only receiving country. But there was a 1,200% increase in asylum applications throughout Central America between 2000, I believe it was 14 and 2016. 1,200% increase. They're going throughout Central America, Mexico, the United States, wherever they can to find protection. I also really want to emphasize that language matters. When we talk about this issue of immigration, we have to know whether we're talking about migrants, immigrants, refugees, or asylum seekers, because all four categories involve very different laws, very different situations and circumstances. A migrant, very briefly, is someone who travels from their home country or point A to point B, and then probably on to point C and beyond, maybe back home again, but the intention is not to stay in the place that they have journeyed to. An immigrant, on the other hand, travels from point A to point B with the intention of staying and rebuilding a new life there. A refugee is someone who is applying to come to the United States with legal status from outside of our borders. And a refugee must be designated an official refugee by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, which means that they must have fled their home country because of fear of persecution based on their race, religion, nationality, their participation in a social group, or participation in a political group. So based on one of those factors, they fear for their life and have to flee their home. Most often, those refugees end up in a refugee camp in country B. And can you believe that out of all the refugees in the world, less than 1% are ever resettled in a third country? Most of them stay in those refugee camps, or if the situation should turn around back home and they're able to return, some do. But it's a very, very small percentage that are ever resettled into a third country. And then to point number 4, asylum seekers fit the same definition as a refugee, but an asylum seeker applies from within U.S. borders for that same protection rather than applying from outside of our borders. This is a really, really important point to make, and I hope that you all take this back home with you. There is nothing illegal in our U.S. system of law about crossing the border into the United States and asking to apply for asylum. You are not breaking the law by crossing the border and asking to apply for asylum. Yet, many of those same people are referred to in our news stories as illegal immigrants and treated as illegal immigrants. So we have to know that we're getting the language right and that we're understanding the situations right that these people come from. I think because we're short on time, I don't have time to go into all the details on this here. You can come to the breakout session and I'll tell you more about refugees and asylum seekers. But I do want to point out one thing. There are lots of problems inherent in our current policy that need to be changed. But I think one of the most egregious to many who study this issue is the fact that if you are accused of any crime in the United States, any other type of crime, you are afforded representation in a court of law. That is not true of immigration. So if you are accused of an immigration-related crime, it is up to you to obtain or secure legal representation. And if you can't afford that, then you are representing yourself in an immigration court. Or perhaps you would get lucky enough to find a pro bono lawyer, but there are definitely not enough of those to meet all the needs. This is even true for the children who are coming into the United States as asylum seekers. We've seen a huge uptick in recent years of children as young as 5 years old, 4 years old, and of family units, lots and lots more women than we've ever seen before crossing the border because their lives are threatened by these gang members in many cases. And those people, even children as young as 5, who are sent with a smuggler or maybe older children who journey on their own, are expected to represent themselves in a court of law and plead their case to a judge to prove why their life is in danger and why they deserve asylum. Less than 30% of those who are seeking asylum are actually granted asylum in this country. So you can imagine how difficult that is, particularly if you don't understand our legal system, if you don't understand the language, or if you're 5 years old. And it's been proven that those people, whether children or adults, who are afforded legal representation, who find a pro bono lawyer or are able to secure a lawyer on their own, their chances are exponentially greater of achieving legal status here in the United States than they would be otherwise. If they are not granted that status, they are sent back to the same situation that they just risked their lives to escape. Again, there's nothing illegal about crossing into the United States and asking to seek asylum. The backlog of cases right now is so great that it may take 2, 3, or even 4 years for that case to come before a judge. But the process, our laws in place say that that is absolutely legal under our laws. So as a body of Christ, how do we respond? Well, first of all, there are 92 biblical references that tell us how we are to treat the stranger or the sojourner among us. And I think as we study all of those references, there are common themes that emerge. Number 1, the most important thing to do, we need to pray and seek God's guidance and His wisdom as we contemplate these issues and try to figure out how we move forward together while absolutely maintaining that issues such as security are important. We're not dismissing those, but we can also as we pray and seek God's wisdom, remember that we are always considering that there's a human at the middle of this story. There are humans on both sides of the border whose lives are at stake. And as we talk about this and pray about this issue, we have to remind ourselves never to dehumanize those who are affected by immigration-related policies. Never stereotype any large group of people by saying all Mexicans are fill in the blank or all Muslims are fill in the blank. It's always wrong to stereotype because, as we know, we're all created with different gifts, abilities, and beautiful elements that God has given us, and that's never okay. We must insist on that respectful dialogue within our congregations, within our families, within our communities. And we have to model that behavior that Christ modeled for us to reach out and care for those in need. Finally, I think perhaps most importantly, we all must remember that we are all created in the image of God. That doesn't stop at any border, especially any man-made border. Whether we are black or white or no matter what part of the world we come from, if we truly see each other as brothers and sisters in Christ, because we are all God's precious children, we start to see things from a different point of view. So I invite you to come and learn more this afternoon if this is a topic of interest, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your presentation, and I encourage you to spend some time with Carrie this afternoon. At this time, I would invite Pastor Jackie Braun to please come forward. We have started the process for a synod study leading up to the bishop's election in 2019, and Jackie is co-chairing with Dennis, and the microphone is yours.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Bishop. As Bishop said, we have started the process for electing a new bishop. We'll be doing that next year this time, May 31st and June 1st. According to our Constitution, there are some things that we have to do first before we get there. One of them is 6 months prior to the election, we need to send out a report to the Synod, to you, about what we're looking for in a bishop. And that will be done by December 1st. So since January, we've been working as a committee, coming up with some questions. What is it that's happening in our state, in our synod, and what is it we want to learn as we begin this process of discerning, what are we looking for in a new bishop? So we have the survey finished. Do we have a slide to show the link to it? Okay. So there is a link. It has to be done electronically, and you can go online at the Synod website. I'm sure it'll be coming out in the e-news as well, and you can go up and can complete this Synod survey as starting today. And you have 2 months. We will be completing that process on August 1st. We will then send, or actually it electronically goes to the ELCA office, and then when they are finished compiling all those results, they'll send it back to our committee. And then in October, we will present the information to the Synod Council meeting October 6th, so that we can then get the information out to you in December. Then the process goes like this. You will use that document. Hopefully we will have learned about some of the fun ministries happening across this state, places where we hear the Spirit moving in our world and calling us to be proclaimers of the promise of good news in Christ, and how we are serving our neighbor, and areas that we are struggling. And we will be able to identify what it is we are kind of looking for in a bishop, a leader for the next 6 years. And so that will be a tool you can use at your conference assemblies, so that you can take that and look at, oh, okay, yes, maybe this pastor here has some of these gifts, and we can ask and visit with him about his interest or her interest in serving the Synod as a bishop. So then we will also have those names at that time. We'll bring them forward so that when we come to Synod Assembly next year, we will have some names at our disposal and begin the process of trying to listen to the Spirit again. Who is it that we hear God calling us and stirring us to call and serve in this state? So I'm going to just briefly ask our committee members to stand, those that have been working on this, so that if you have questions, you can certainly come and approach any one of us. It is Dennis Thompson, he's the co-chair from Bear Butte. Scott Parsley from Madera Conference, John Rasmussen, Reed Christofferson, Pastor Marcia Sylvester, and Pastors Ben and Kristen Isley. Oh, there's Ben way in the back, and Kristen. So I want to thank them too. It's been a joy to work alongside them and to learn about this. So, and you can always visit with me too. Thank you.
So what would you like to do? Thank you very much, Jackie. I appreciate your work and the work of the study group. I'm looking forward to hear the results, see the results. All right, I need your indulgence. If we do orders of the day, we're at break. We have a few elections that need to happen. One of them has to happen before tomorrow morning. I think we can move through them quickly. With your permission, we would do that and then go to the break. Is that okay? All right. So I need the group up in front, our lovely panel. There will be unanimous ballots as of this time for the discipline, consultation committees, and the Chapel in the Hills. Discipline and consultation are two committees that we pray every morning, at least I do, that are never called into formation. It means that we've had something happen in one of our congregations that is not appropriate, and we need to begin the discipline process. Both of those committees work in that area, both discipline and the consultation committee. So I am inviting you to, if you so desire, to cast a unanimous ballot for the names that you see up on the screen to serve on those three boards at this time. If you are in favor of that, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? If you vote no, you're going to be on one of those committees. No. All right. It is carried for all three. And then resolution number 2, the election of South Dakota Synod Council members.
Election South Dakota Synod Council members. Resolved that the South Dakota Synod ELCA elect the following conference nominees to the South Dakota Synod Council for a term of 4 years. From Madera Conference, Valerie Parsley. Crossroads Conference, Reverend Lane Nelson. Southeastern Conference, Tom Stotz. Prairie Rivers Conference, Reverend Lon Quanley. And Bear Butte Conference, Bonnie Lang. Recommendation do pass.
Seeing no one moving, all those in favor of voting or electing those individuals who have been nominated.
Just a question.
Yes.
Prairie Coteau Conference.
Who are you, first of all?
Oh, Pastor Mindy Erke from Clark and Florence. We nominated Pam Seefeld to take the place of our layperson on Synod Council. I did not see anybody from our Prairie Coteau on that list. Are we?
Right. She's already been seated.
Okay.
Yeah, she's fulfilling a partial term.
So we don't need to do
that? No, we're
okay.
Good. Thank you, though. All right, ready to vote? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? They are elected. The reason we needed to do it today is we're installing them tomorrow. All right, resolution 6, churchwide voting members.
Resolution 6, Resolved, I'm going to read the resolve, and then the names could be posted. There is one updated name from the youth representative. Resolved that the 2018 South Dakota Synod Assembly elect the following voting members and alternates to the 2019 ELCA Churchwide Assembly, August 5th through the 10th in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, nominated by conferences and the Synod Council. Recommendation do pass.
And do we have the additional alternate for youth? If you keep that up, I'm going to throw up. You did get it on there. All right. Yeah, Nick Rabb was nominated and is the youth alternate. All right. So, are you ready to vote? All right. All those in favor of electing those people that have been nominated by conferences or Synod Council, please do so by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, they are elected, and look forward to being with you in Milwaukee. Please know if you're the alternate, please be in ongoing contact with the Synod office. About 20% of the time we need to use the alternate. Just as I've served in the church, not just in this office, but in others. That's about the norm. Just because life happens, we're not going to meet again we won't gather until August of 19. So life can happen. So please, if you move or that kind of stuff, please be in contact with the Synod office in case we need to get a hold of you. Before we go to break, we want to say thank you to Prairie Coteau, which is providing the food for the break. We also want to say thank you to Kurt Osborne, former LPG person, who is now the proud owner of Cool Beans, and Rotisserie, who has been providing the coffee for this event. And if you're ever in Brookings, stop in and say hi. So if nothing else, this assembly is fueled by Cool Beans, which is clearly worthy of being tweeted. There is a short resolutions committee meeting at 2:25 in the office conference room. There are, again, 4 lines in the downstairs and in the upstairs gathering place for the break. And we still have copies of the Armed Forces military prayer book. It is just a really fine piece of material. I travel with one. I use it regularly as I carry out my responsibilities in this office. If you have military members in your family or if you are active duty, it's free to you. Otherwise, we ask for an $8 donation. If you have not picked up your youth gathering t-shirts, far side of the break area, and please go see the vendors and have a conversation. And let's have a little traveling music from Tangled Blue. Come back at 3 o'clock.
Breathe deep the breath of God.
I don't know that one. I read the announcement.
Breathe deep the breath of God. Breathe deep the breath of God. Breathe deep the breath of God. Politicians, morticians, Philistines, homophobes, skinheads, deadheads, tax evaders, street kids, alcoholics, workaholics, wise guys, dimwits, blue colors, white colors, war among us, peace sticks. Breathe deep the breath of God. 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 Suicidals, rock idols, shut-ins, dropouts, friendless, homeless, penniless, and depressed presidents and residents, foreigners and aliens, dissidents, feminists, xenophobes, chauvinists. Breathe deep the breath of God. 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 Police, obese, preachers and teachers, meat eaters, five fingers, judges and juries, long hairs, no hairs, everybody everywhere, breathe deep the breath of